We have some extremely exciting news for you all. The Anselm Society is going to be hosting our first weekend event since 2022. It's called Anselm's Long Expected Feast. It's going to be this September 19th and 20th. And as you may be able to guess, all you Tolkien fans out there, it will be in honor, in part, of Bilbo and Frodo's birthdays. The weekend will include a retreat with your choice of in depth workshops, an afternoon of restorative activities, and an evening pub night, plus a few very special surprises. Now, we are expecting that tickets for this event are going to sell out fast. So please make plans and get on the early bird wait list for this over at anselmsociety.org/fall feast. Once again, keep a lookout for Anselm's Long Expected Feast this September 19th and 20th. Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and the lore of this ancient world known as nonfiction writing. At a corner table by the fire are two people. One of them has heard the name Matt Multnomah, and when he throws off the hood of his Jedi cloak, he stares across the deserts of Tatooine and says, "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long, long time." And that's me, Matthew Multnomah. Notice the difference. And welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. Now, as only the longest-term listeners of this podcast will know, I haven't always written middle grade novels. Back in the early days, the primordial days of this podcast, I wrote nonfiction. It was somewhere between memoir, Christian living, and theological essay. My agent at the time called it memoir with a message. That's right. I even had an agent. I was serious about this stuff. Now, I will spare you all the long, circuitous journey from nonfiction to middle grade fiction. Suffice it to say that I'm now confident that my particular niche of the publishing world involves writing stories for kids about people who ride dinosaurs and posting Instagram videos about what to do if you find a Bigfoot skeleton. But I still keep tabs on the world of Christian nonfiction. And that's partly because so many of our Anselm Society Arts Guild members, Amy Lee, Jonna Soderstrom, Christina Brown, to name only a few, are actively writing and creating in this world. But also because this world, Christian nonfiction, is objectively important. The literary space of Christian living, theological teaching, and spiritual formation is important for, well, the church. So whether we write about the intersection of faith and politics or about, well, dinosaurs, we should care about this space being as healthy as possible. So now, enter our guest, Will Parker Anderson. Among many things, he is a senior editor at Waterbrook and Multnomah, an imprint of Penguin Random House. His role is acquiring and editing books on Christian living, Bible teaching, and spiritual formation, along with other faith-based nonfiction titles. Beyond this work, Will is an important resource as a writing coach and a general book industry expert. In addition to that, he has 15 years of experience in the pastoral ministry and nonprofit sector. He's joined us here at the Digital Pub Table today to discuss how the often fraught waters of Christian nonfiction can be navigated faithfully, and how we can support work that is both excellent and edifying. So, Will Parker Anderson, welcome to the Digital Pub Table.
Thanks, Matt, for having me. That was one of the best podcast introductions I've heard. You mentioned Bigfoot and a Jedi cloak, so well done. Good to be here.
Thank you. I hope my Alec Guinness impression really came through, but so
nailed it.
So thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to this. Let's start off with just a little bit about your background. I may have been perusing your CV, and I noticed you have a bachelor's degree in journalism, a master's in New Testament from Talbot, and now you have your current role Now, it's easy to see sort of a straight line. Okay, you have the writing, you have the theology. Was it a straight line for you, or was it more of a meandering path to what you do now?
Yeah, it was meandering. In fact, I would call it unexpected. I fully thought that I would be a pastor for the rest of my life. And then God took me on a different journey, and writing has always been a part of my life. As you mentioned, I majored in journalism. I was writing poems and short stories in elementary school all the way through high school, and just always loved that. But yeah, I actually did a project with The Chosen, the TV series, and I was a part of this group of writers for that, and met an editor at Waterbrook and Multnomah, and one thing led to another, and so it really did catch me by surprise. But like many things that the Lord leads us to, in retrospect, has made a lot of sense. And the way that I describe editing is, it feels like the role I was preparing for my whole life without realizing it. And now that I'm in it, it resonates on a deep level with all of the things that I love, which is relationships with interesting people, getting into good ideas, reading books, the craft of writing, even some entrepreneurial aspects as you're trying to acquire projects. So, yep, absolutely love what I do, but did not think that I would be here even 10 years ago.
All right, so let's talk about the day-to-day for you. I want to get into the nitty-gritty before we zoom out to the broader picture about the industry in general. So I noticed you talk about acquisitions and then just the editing. So acquisitions, acquiring new titles; editing, I'm assuming it's more preparing the titles you've already acquired for publication. So did I get that right? And also, how does that break down to the amount of time you spend in a typical day, assuming there is such a thing?
Yeah. Oh, well, our dream day as editors is to wake up, look at our calendar, see 0 meetings, drive to a coffee shop, and just immerse ourselves in a book and edit for the whole day. And that does happen occasionally, but the joke among the editorial team is that we barely have time to edit. I mean, there's so many other tasks. It takes an army of people behind the scenes to produce a book. And so there's just a lot of moving pieces. So just really quickly, in the hopefully not a boring way, my role in the role of most editors, I think, breaks down into 3 buckets. So editing is the main one, and that's the fun stuff. That's getting into the content, helping shape it, sharing ideas with authors. The second bucket is acquiring. And so that's a super competitive space for every book that an author that we believe in and make an offer to. There's other publishers lined up ready to sort of box us out and win over the author. So there's some healthy competition there. Sometimes your heart breaks as you get really attached to a writer and their work, and you start thinking about editing them, only to find out they went with another publisher. But that's the name of the game. And then the third bucket is the one I dread the most, which is project management. And that is highly administrative, highly logistical. That's everything from, oh, we just got the cover in, and this is maybe round 2 of edits. I need to run those by the author. Oh, the author came back. He wants to change 10 things. Now I got to communicate those back to the team. And maybe the designer is going to be annoyed, and I have to navigate that. And I just got 10 endorsements that I have to edit and get those in. So it's just sort of a fire hose of tasks that come all day, every day, and just learning to balance them. So, like I said, that's probably the least fun part of the role, but all of them really are ways to serve our authors, and that is the heartbeat of this role. It's a very behind the scenes supportive role, and it's very rewarding. I love what I do, but yeah, those are the main tenets.
Yeah, and now that we have those main tenets, again, let's sort of zoom the camera out to talk about the purpose of this industry in the first place, right? You mentioned that one of your tasks is servicing the authors. What is the big value of that? How would you justify the Christian nonfiction publishing industry to somebody who may be a little skeptical of its value?
Yeah, I mean, I would want to know where their skepticism is coming from and what specifically they have an issue with. Some people are skeptical of large companies, including the Big Five, which Waterbrook and Multnomah is part of, sort of a corporate cynicism. However, working within, the publisher I work for, there's just so many big-hearted people that have been doing this for decades that are truly advocates for the author. And so what we do is highly, highly relational. It's not just cranking out as many books as we can to boost the bottom line or anything like that. But I would say a big part of my role is not just helping to shape content, but to walk with an author through the process. I'm sure your listeners know well that writing is daunting. Imposter syndrome is real. And just because you land a book deal doesn't mean that your life slows down and creates all this creative space for you to do your best work. A lot of times writers are up against deadlines, or they just honestly need to talk and process. A lot of my time is spent just sitting and listening. And at the end of a call with an author, they'll say, "Thank you so much. Like, we broke through the barrier." And I'm thinking, I just listened, but they just need to process. They just need someone in their corner, someone who they feel, is an expert or understands books or has seen this same problem they're encountering before. And so I absolutely love that coaching aspect of what I do. But then zooming out from there, just the Christian nonfiction industry as a whole, words are transformative. We see that from the very start of the storyline of Scripture, that with words alone, God creates life. And as people made in his image, I think he calls us in a different way, of course, not creating ex nihilo out of nothing, but to take what he's given us, be it our experience, our education, our creativity, our ideas, and to channel those into something that truly meets people where they're at. And I think the best books within the space I work in are those that make readers feel seen, put their finger on some ache that they can't quite name yet, but the book articulates it for them, and it's this freeing thing, and then takes them on a journey toward further clarity. Maybe it's healing, restoration. There's always a promise that nonfiction books make, good nonfiction books make, that if you follow this book to the very end, here's how your life will transform, or here's how you'll know your creator in a deeper way, or whatever the promise is. And so I think though the world has exploded with mediums and ways of consuming stories and content, it's incredible that books continue to sell. And some of them are now audiobooks, of course, but even print, paperback, hardcovers are doing really well. And I think people long for a reprieve from just the digital grind and always having a screen, doom scrolling, whatever you want to call it, but to sit with a good book, those who have learned that art, or at least open to it. And sounds like, Matt, the writing you do trains younger readers at an earlier age to start doing that, which is an incredible life skill that will pay dividends forever. But yeah, I mean, books are transformative. And I love the fact that all the effort that I put into a book is not just to make a good product, but it's to change lives. And knowing that some of the books I work on are going to be held by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, that's a weighty responsibility and also an immense privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you framed it that way, so we can see sort of the mission statement, the purpose that we're going towards. So now let's start getting a little more into the nitty gritty, because I am sure that we have a lot of listeners who are either deeply invested in like reading and interacting in this world, or maybe they're writing books, they're preparing manuscripts, they're kind of preparing to enter this world in some form or another. So I mentioned earlier, in a prior life, back when I was Obi-Wan instead of O-Ben, I was involved in this world to a certain extent, but that was like 10 years ago, which is an eternity in the publishing industry. So from what you've seen in your time, what you've seen with editors, other folks you work with who've been in the industry for a long time, how would you say the Christian nonfiction industry has been developing and shaping over the past several years?
Yeah, that's a great question. My mind goes to so many places. This is also, it's what we do. It's like a treasure hunt. We're always trying to figure out and forecast where things might be headed. And that informs the books that we take on because we have, of course, limited slots. So, wow. I mean, one thing I would say is there's a seeming return to Christian practices. Sometimes that's referred to as spiritual formation or spiritual disciplines, but people seemingly, especially I would say Gen Z and millennials in particular, seem to be disenchanted with sort of the laid back church model that requires little of you, the consumer culture of the megachurch. And actually, we've pivoted back toward liturgy. And so there are a lot of authors writing in that space, writing around, some call it a common rule, some just call them practices. But yeah, there's a huge hunger for structure in the life that Jesus calls us to and what that looks like. So whether it's prayer or fasting or solitude or Sabbath, we're seeing these themes. There's a great hunger from readers to discover more. So that's a huge one. The other really seismic shift I would point to that's probably happened over the last 10 to 15 years is social media and how it has just taken over. And what that means for writers and publishers is that there was a day and an age where publishers bore the majority of the responsibility to market and promote an author and his or her work. So it was a great deal for writers. If you had incredible writing chops, really creative ideas, your book could end up in Barnes & Noble, and those existed then too. And it could be placed right next to a best-selling author who sold millions of copies. And you're at that point a no-name, and you have that level of discoverability. Now it's a little bit different. Now writers generally are expected to come in with some level of platform, a following that they've built, that particularly people are coming to them for whatever it is they want to write about. So they've sort of carved out a space for themselves where people, come to them for that topic or that subject, and there's traction that's visible there. And that doesn't necessarily mean huge numbers, and it doesn't have to mean social media. It could be an email newsletter, a YouTube channel, live speaking that this person does, a number of things. But regardless, yeah, publishers now are expecting writers to have built that somewhat already, which is a newer phenomenon. So those are two things that I'd point to.
I'm really glad you brought both of those points up because, again, me back in the antediluvian times when I was in this, that was one of the things that got me probably the most stressed out. It's like building a platform, right? How to get noticed, how to get the email subscribers, all of that stuff. And I'm guessing, because again, I'm sort of on the peripheries of this world, you are right smack dab in the middle of it. So I am guessing one of the primary frustrations you get from prospective authors is this issue of platforms. So I will present the ultimate cynic's formulation of this platform thing, which I'm guessing you've heard a million times, and I'll have you take that on. So The cynical formulation would be, basically, we're just counting social media followers. It doesn't matter if the writing's good, doesn't matter if it's helpful. It matters if you're able to get attention in the social media realm. As long as you can get attention, you've got yourself a book. So really, we're looking for social media influencers instead of writers. Again, I'm guessing you've heard that a million times. What's your response to that?
Yeah, my response is, first of all, that's true in some cases. So just to face it head on, absolutely. There was a friend, her friend's dad over COVID decided to start cooking and recording it on his phone. And before he knew it, he blew up on TikTok and had like 2 million followers. That guy is probably going to get a cookbook, book deal. And is that a bad thing? I don't think so. It depends on the genre. So that's the first part, is I'd say, yes, that can be true. But I actually share that cynicism, and there is nothing more tedious and mind-numbing than receiving a manuscript from an influencer that cannot write and was offered to hire a writer and still said no. And so here we have this mess. Nobody wants that. And so that would be Mythbuster number 1. Mythbuster number 2 would be that we don't always offer those folks, those influencers, book deals, because what we were learning is that social media numbers do not necessarily convert to book sales as maybe one would expect. But people are getting, in many cases, what they want from that person's TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is, X. And so, yeah, that's another thing. We regularly turn down book proposals when we don't see a substantive concept, when the writing is not up to the standard it should be. And now I'll flip that on its head. I just signed an author with 300 Instagram followers. That was the extent of his platform. And there's many reasons why we said yes to that book. But just for people to hear that and to sort of crush that paradigm, generally speaking, yes, you want a platform that's established in some way, or at least to show that you're building it, that you have a plan. However, the numbers are not everything. And so I think in some ways, everybody needs to build a platform, but it doesn't have to look one way. And it can be in a life-giving way that makes sense for you. So I can use myself as a brief example of failure, really. I spent about a year trying to build on Instagram because I write myself. I have something called Writer Circle. That's essentially, it's a newsletter and a podcast for aspiring writers to help demystify this whole publishing process. So I went to Instagram because I saw a lot of other writing coaches there and just didn't get much traction. Then I switched over to Substack, and I was shocked at how easy it was to post. No more editing reels, no more trying to be on camera, none of that. And then I was also shocked at how the community there is primarily there for writing and reading words. Who would have thought that there would be a platform centered around writing today? And I just kind of quit all other social media and I went all in on Substack. And that was only a couple months ago. But for me, it's extremely life-giving. I have a ton of great interaction with writers. I can answer their questions. I publish regularly, writing tips, publishing tips, even on the topic we're discussing, how to build your platform. So yeah, those are a few things I'd say. I'd say there's hope for those that really want little or nothing to do with marketing their content. So maybe a bit of a reality check for them. You got to do something. Nobody just gets to sit in a remote cabin overlooking a lake, write their dream book, and it just gets discovered. No, we all have to have skin in the game. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that you may not need the numbers that you think you do, and you can find ways of building your platform. And maybe you don't even want to call it that, of finding your people that will give you life and not drain you. And so we have to be really honest as we're trying to find our people, to not imitate what others are doing at the expense of our own souls, at the expense of our own creative bandwidth, but to find ways that fuel what we're doing and offer rewards for that, which would just be feedback from people, seeing an impact that we're making. And so that's how I would answer that question. But I'll be the first to admit it's a tough one. The platform piece is quite perplexing for all of us. So,
well, I'm glad to see I'm not the only one. I have been cajoled and prodded into getting onto Instagram for so long by people who are like, basically told me like, hey, if you're serious about this, you like you said, you need to do something. Come on, do this. So yes. I am trying, and as you saw, it's resulted in Bigfoot videos so far, but I'm still working on it. I still have time. But
you've arrived. It doesn't get any better than Bigfoot videos.
There we go. Yeah. You heard it here. But to that point, because again, for this huge group of people, aspiring authors, you hold this sort of secret knowledge almost, right? You are one of the acquisitions editors. You hold the keys to the kingdom. So there are probably people trying to pick your brain, all this stuff. So my question to you is, what do you think is the most common misconception that these people have about your role, what you're looking for, and what it is you can do?
Yeah, that's great. I suppose the stereotype is that editors are sort of curmudgeons who love to shoot down ideas and just vote them down. But yeah, I can only speak to Waterbrook and Multnomah, of course, where I work, but we're highly collaborative. So as one editor, I do not have vetoing power to say, this book, I'm for it. I'm just going to move it through. We're going to try to acquire it. It is a group effort, and we need one another in the editorial environment to spot one another's blind spots. So, sales reps will speak into whether we take on a book, marketing folks, publicity folks, editorial directors who oversee a team of editors, as well as fellow editors. So everyone has a chance to speak in, and it's really, really helpful. So yeah, it's a little more complex than just trying to get your manuscript into the hands of an editor. But backing up a step even more, I think a huge misconception is that you should cold pitch your book to a editor. I get this a lot. Like, I wouldn't say daily, but certainly weekly, where someone will somehow find me. Sometimes it's an email. Just last week, it was a friend who connected me with a writer via text and just said, will you read my book? Of course, Substack, I get a lot of inquiries there. And what most people don't think about is that you need a literary agent. That if you're going to talk about a true gatekeeper of the industry, so to speak, it's really agents. So for those who don't know the process, an agent will represent you as a writer and send your proposal out to multiple publishers. And the benefit of that is that they're opening that door for you. The fact that they're vouching for your writing gives you an authority you wouldn't have if you were just a cold email in an editor's otherwise crowded inbox. And of course, I know writers who have landed book deals without an agent, and that does happen. But on the whole, you would want an advocate. You'd want someone to help you put your best foot forward and increase your chances of landing your book somewhere. And so, yeah, that would be a huge one for people. I wouldn't recommend cold pitching publishers. I get pushback on that sometimes, but as I watch all those writers, the success rate is dismal, and I find it kind of cruel to get people's hopes up. I had talked with one writer a month or two ago, and he had done this. He had met an editor and submitted his proposal, and he waited 1.5 years only to hear no at the end of that. And so totally strung along. I'm not assuming ill will on the part of the editor. I'm sure things just got busy, but this poor writer waited 1.5 years just to hear no. That would not happen with an agent. And so, yeah. And if someone's listening to this, like, well, that's cool, but how do I find an agent? A great resource is the Christian Writers Market Guide. It has a whole chapter listing agents, their areas of interest, in other words, what types of writing and writers they take on as clients, and their contact information so you can email them. And I would recommend that if you don't know someone who's published who could introduce you to their agent, the next best step would be to buy a resource like the Christian Writers Market Guide and to just start emailing and see if you can at least have a conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you put that misconception, because that gets to a larger issue too, because I feel like a lot of writers, in their more grumbly times, think like, it's this secret cabal of people who are holding me back. They could let me in. It's like, no, they're people with jobs who also have families who they want to see at night. They have limited amount of hours in the day. They cannot read every person who sends a book to them. They need these structures like agents who can vouch for them and get them the best stuff. So there are processes. I think it's easy to get into this mode where it's like, oh, if I only meet the right person, right? I meet the right person, get the manuscript in his hands, and he'll magically wave a wand and change my world. That does not generally happen. It's usually a longer haul. The first step of that haul is often finding an agent. So to to that point, and you hinted at this with your past answer, is there's a lot of folks, I'm sure you've seen them with, the writers circle, the people you meet at conferences, the writers who feel this passion, feel drawn to it, but they feel frustrated. They feel like the doors are not opening. They're like, well, do I really have this call if nothing's happening? What do you tell to people who are at that point, who feel the call, but they also see the locked door?
Yeah, well, even the language you used is exactly what I hear all the time. The number of writers that say, God's called me to write this, or God told me, or God put it on my heart. And so, and I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I think that lingo is overused in Christian circles. We can baptize any dream we have with God's command and commission. And again, that's not to belittle anyone's sense that God has put it on their heart to write. I think that's very sacred. However, you can do a lot of good with your words, regardless of whether you publish them yourself or land a book deal. And so saying every writer should land a book deal is like saying every business should succeed. There's a reason that some do and some don't. And sometimes it's truly the quality of the writing, the uniqueness of the idea, the resonance of the platform, all those things. Sometimes it's, I don't know if you want to call it luck, or it's a relational connection that someone has, and that certainly happens. But I think to the person who feels like doors just aren't opening at all, I think there's a number of reasons that could be. The hardest to handle would be maybe your writing isn't quite there yet. That's possible, or your platform. So maybe asking yourself the diagnostic question of, am I regularly self-publishing content that's resonating? So that even parsing out that sentence, am I regularly publishing content myself? If the answer is no, a book deal will not be your silver bullet. You got to get those reps in. You have to, as I like to say, practice in public. And so that's one thing. Okay, let's say you are doing that. Is it resonating? Are you seeing some response? Are you seeing people engage with you? And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. It could be a handful of people, but consider where are you actually at as a writer? Where is your skill level? And then the other thing I would say to the frustrated person who feels like they just keep hitting dead ends is, how connected to community are you? Are you doing this by yourself and putting out your content, hoping people find it? Or are you investing in your craft and in your career as a writer? And I really would think of it as a career. I don't think that's anti-creative or draining writing of its essence. But what do you do with a career you take seriously? Well, you try to connect with other people. So are you going to conferences? There are many Christian writing conferences that allow you to meet with an agent and get feedback. There's lots of writing coaches and writing groups. And so the more you're around people, the more you're inviting some of those key connections. So many writers, how their journey or how their breakthrough happened, many of them after years and years of just faithfully writing hardly anyone saw or read, was someone they knew said, hey, why don't you pitch this idea? Or here's one specific example, a writer I really respect, Justin Whitmore Early. His pastor was approached by a publisher, and they asked his pastor, hey, would you want to write a book? He's like, I don't have time for that, but there's this guy, Justin, in my congregation who you should definitely talk to. And that's how Justin got his first book deal. He told me that story on my podcast. And I love that because Justin had written for a decade, just super consistently, just would send things out to his friends. And just one day his pastor said, hey, an editor contacted me, but I'm going to send him to you if that's cool. And you want to continually sow in relationship. It's really, really important. I think, yeah, those two things are key: consistently writing and putting your work out there, and then consistently meeting new people and putting yourself in that position to receive an opportunity. I think are two key elements of it.
I love the way that you framed that, because I feel like a lot of people, I'm looking at me among many others, when they face rejection, it's like, well, I'm just not good enough. That's it. I've been rejected by the universe. So I'm just going to go crawl in a hole and, feel sorry for myself. But instead, you give like a diagnostic. It's like, no, here are steps you can take to improve your chances. You can practice and get better as a writer. You can put more writing out there. You can connect with people. There's different steps you can take. It's a growth mindset. It's not like, well, is my natural gift big enough to succeed? It's like, no, you need to put in all the effort as well.
Yeah. Well, here's a quote that it's hard hitting, but I think it's important to hear. And it's from Ryan Holiday in his book, Perennial Seller. And he says, quote, "Children expect opportunities to be handed to them. Maturity is understanding that you have to go out and make them. The competitive landscape for creating something that lasts is not one for the entitled or half committed." And wow, I mean, that can sting at first. What I would amend this slightly, I would say, yes, go out and make opportunities. I would also say, circling back to our original point, like, God is also sovereign over all things, and that includes our words, that includes our creative endeavors. And so I think, yes, there's a hustle element to it, and that's what Ryan Holiday is capturing. But I think that's probably the word to get out there and go for it, that more Christian writers need, at least the ones that I meet regularly. More of us are prone to sit back out of timidity, sometimes out of entitlement, speaking for myself here, and like, oh, God's just going to seal the deal for me. But there's so much you learn. There's so much that the Lord sows into your character when you try things and fail. And so God's not looking to give us a shortcut or a silver bullet and rob us of that pain, that growth, to be driven back into dependence on Him, to really find out if writing is a part of our soul, a part of our calling. Like, we can throw that language around. So many people I meet say, I'm called to write a book, but then you ask them, well, how often do you work on it? How often do you write? And they're like, well, not really at all. And so, yeah, I think God wants us to take risks. He wants us to position ourselves to be able to receive blessings, and we don't manipulate Him, or it's not a formula. However, that's where some of my favorite moments with God have been, when I'm unsure of something, but I just go for it. Or I put something out there and it's criticized, and I have to kind of crawl back and ask those tough questions like, Lord, do you really want me to do this? Or sometimes I have to acknowledge gaps and weaknesses in my own ideas or writing, and I emerge from that, hopefully a little bit wiser, a little bit tougher. And writing is not for the faint of heart. There are so many other creative endeavors you can do that will spare you the pain and agony of writing. But for those of us who really love it, we also know the other side, which is the joy and the reward and the labor of love that doesn't care ultimately how many people see it. It's the joy of creating itself that draws us in again and again, and we get addicted to that. And so hopefully that answered your question, Matt.
That absolutely did. And we are actually running low on time, but that's a great note for us to close this main part of the conversation on. But before we go, you've mentioned this already, but for the listeners who want to learn more about who you are and what you do, where can we find you? Where can we find your work?
Absolutely. I appreciate you asking that. Yeah, so the Writer Circle podcast is a great space. Everything I do through Writer Circle is intended to help aspiring writers, even like some writers on my list who listen regularly, they have published books. So it's not just for beginners, but I have agents on my podcast that talk about what they do, how to find an agent. I have editors on the show who give writing tips. I also have a lot of authors that you would probably recognize if someone is familiar with the Christian nonfiction world at all. You're going to recognize some of the names. So I try to approach craft and this mystery that is publishing on the podcast. And then I also have a newsletter called Writer Circle, where I send out a writing or publishing tip every Saturday morning. And so all of that can be found at writercircle.co.
Awesome. So once again, it's Will Parker Anderson. It's Writer Circle. Thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, as you can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have an extra maybe 30 or so seconds to spare right now, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.